Welcome to BL Stories, where romance, drama, and unforgettable boys' love come to life. Love knows no limits, and the best stories aren't always straight. Subscribe now and join our growing BL-loving family. Chapter 23. We were roused at 3 in the morning by Nate, far earlier than we'd agreed the night before. I was so exhausted I could have slept standing. John had left over an hour earlier to get supplies, while Nate crouched over the engine of the rusted car we'd be traveling in. Kyle lay on the hard couch beside me, fast asleep again, and for the 100th time I wondered why we had to get up so early if there was nothing to do. Nate's sour mood kept me from asking. It was still very dark and cold, my joints ached. It had been only hours since we'd left the prison and I had no real idea what was happening out in the world. I worried that our faces might already be on wanted posters or that our story was on the news. Part of me didn't want to know. The news would only make everything feel more real. A loud clatter, metal hitting metal, made me push up from the couch and investigate. In the doorway I stopped and watched. Nate bent over a spill of tools, muttering to himself with a flashlight tucked between his teeth. His hands and plain white shirt were smeared with grease. For some reason the sight made me smile. "Need help?" I offered, but he kept gathering the scattered tools without looking up. "Go back inside," he said sharply. I felt my lip bite back the retort. "Nate. Riley, this is hard enough without you being difficult, all right? Go back inside." He was firm and final. Not wanting him to make me feel worse, I turned away and stepped back into the room where Kyle slept, oblivious to the mess of feeling churning inside me. 10 minutes later Nate came in and headed straight to the bathroom. Footsteps and then the sound of running water followed. I couldn't tell whether his mood was just frustration with the situation or regret that he'd even come along. Even though his presence comforted me at times, I'd caught myself wishing he hadn't come, an ungrateful and selfish thought I pushed away. Freedom mattered more than appearances. I wanted it so badly I could almost taste it. Every time doubt crept in, I remembered why I'd taken that first step. I'd been framed, and I would fight for my freedom. No more hiding in a corner like a frightened animal. With friends, because that's what they were, I was going to try. "Kyle." Nate's voice interrupted my thoughts. I moved to wake him. "What?" came the groggy reply. I pointed toward the bathroom. Nate stood there cleaning the blade of a pair of scissors. "Come here," he said, then disappeared back into the small room. Kyle pushed himself up, stifled a yawn, and followed. Curiosity pulled me to the doorway. Nate stood behind Kyle, who faced the sink and watched himself in the mirror. With the scissors, Nate gathered Kyle's dirty blonde hair and began to cut. "What are you doing?" I asked when another clump dropped to the floor. "You'll need to change your appearance if you don't want to be recognized," Nate said plainly. More strands fell. "I've always wanted a mohawk." "No, don't cut that part, Nate." Kyle gave impatient directions and Nate complied. "He's not your hairdresser, Kyle. Take what you get," John's booming voice said behind me. I jumped. He had returned and dropped bags on the floor, coming to stand beside me in the doorway with a smaller bag that he handed to Nate. "Hey Johnny, did you get my lip balm?" Kyle asked, smiling at his reflection. John grunted, reached into a bag, and tossed a small pack of lip balms into the sink. Kyle caught them with a grin. "Hurry up, D. We don't have much time," John said. I watched as Nate produced a straight-edge razor from John's bag. Within minutes Kyle looked almost unrecognizable. The sides of his head were shaved low and the remaining hair was dyed dark. He looked like a different person. If he'd had eyeliner and leather, he'd be a gothic rocker. "You're dripping all over the place," I said, and he shrugged. "All right, your turn." John handed me a bottle of dye and guided me toward the bathroom. When I looked in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. My hair was chopped to a length no longer than a fingernail, short like a child's. For a few seconds I felt unmoored. John began cutting carefully, and a moment later my dark curls pooled at my feet. Nate watched as John worked, fingers idly tracing memories I knew he kept to himself. When his gaze met mine, he looked away and began rummaging through the bags. I lowered my head and folded my hands in my lap. A little later Kyle came back in, grinning. "I look evil," he announced. Gone was his dirty blonde. His hair was cut into a mock mohawk and black as midnight. He'd certainly attract attention now if anyone was looking for him. John handed me a full bottle of dye. The first attempt turned out a strange orange-brown that would have made me stand out more than blend in, so I rinsed, tried again, and finally got the right shade, platinum blonde. I even dyed my eyebrows to match. When I was finished, I didn't bother to stare at my reflection. Everything was becoming real. We were actually doing this. John gathered the empty bottles and, with a blunt gesture, tossed them and my discarded prison uniform into the fire he'd started in a metal garbage can. He then handed each of us a small knapsack with a toothbrush, toothpaste, a few changes of underwear, and some shirts. By 5 a.m. we were on the road in the shaky rust bucket, heading wherever John and Nate decided. I fiddled with the pair of fake glasses they'd given me and wondered why John and Nate didn't disguise themselves too. Kyle voiced the same question. "We have our reasons," John answered curtly. Of course they were hiding something. I had no surprise, and so long as they were committed to helping us, I didn't care. Nathan's POV. 3 hours, 2 brief stops, and 32 minutes later we pulled into a motel that had clearly seen better days. While John checked in, I told the others to stay inside and went to find the nearest payphone. The plan had unraveled the moment the fight started, and after 2 years in that place, surrounded by thieves, violent men, and hardened criminals, we'd failed to keep things clean. I imagined the rest of the team being briefed back at headquarters. With John and me gone, it wouldn't take long for anyone to notice. If our names leaked, we'd be fugitives accused of aiding an escape, and if caught we'd lose everything, our jobs, our reputations, our livelihoods. That thought gnawed at me and steeled my resolve to make this work. The other thing keeping me focused was Riley, though thinking about him stirred an impatience and something like anger inside me, and that wouldn't help. I dropped coins into the payphone and dialed the number that had been carved into my memory for years. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Chief Hayes," a gravelly voice answered. "It's me. I have a problem," I said. A brief silence, then his voice. "Where the hell are you, Grayson? You and John better get down here this second or it's your job's on the line." "I can't do that, Chief. It's more than our jobs right now." I told him everything. How we believed Riley had been framed, how he'd escaped, and how we'd gone after him. I explained that we intended to clear his name and bring everyone home safely, and that we needed the Chief's help to do it. He didn't speak immediately. When he finally answered, his tone was grave. "You understand what's at stake. Even if you prove his innocence, it's not that simple. There's talk he and his friend helped plan the escape, charges for aiding a breakout, damage to state property, obstruction. Do I need to list more?" I swallowed, the weight of it pressing down. Whatever came next, whatever consequences waited, we had to try. We had to see this through. "I understand all that, sir. We all do. We'll figure everything else out when we get to that point. But right now, I've got a kid who doesn't deserve what happened to him, and I can't focus on much else." Then you also understand that the only reason you and John aren't all over the media as accomplices is because, technically, the operation never happened, which means you were never there. Only a handful of people knew about it, and now a handful of people are aware that you're missing. "Yes, sir." He sighed. "I've worked with you for years, Nathan. I trust your instincts and respect your judgment. You're one of my best agents. If you're sure about this, I won't stop you. But if you get caught before you figure this out, you're on your own. There's a line even I won't cross. Not even for you." "I understand, sir." After a pause, his voice softened. "All right then. I'll hold things down here for as long as I can and keep your name out of it. But eventually, the truth will come out, so you'll need to act quickly. You know where my private cabin is. You can rest there for a while. It's stocked, and if you're careful, you should be safe." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Just one more thing. What can you tell me about Eddie?" The only thing I knew was that he'd been shot, and even John hadn't said much. I couldn't move forward until I knew his status. The chief sighed, and I felt the answer before he spoke. My heart sank. "The doctors don't think he'll last the night," he said quietly. I swallowed hard, then nodded. "Thank you, sir. Good luck, Grayson." I can only hope you both come home in one piece." When the call ended, I stood still for a moment, gathering my strength. Then, pushing the heavy news aside, I fed a few more coins into the slot and called up a restaurant. We'd be having takeout for breakfast. Riley's POV. Time passed strangely fast, even though Kyle and I had spent the whole day doing nothing but lounging around while John and Nate worked on plans. The rundown motel had only 2 beds and a nightstand, but to me, it felt like a palace compared to being locked up. None of us had stepped outside all day. With nothing else to do, I drifted between naps and long talks with Kyle, who, as always, found ways to pester John. It was strange watching John change. The man who once looked at me with nothing but annoyance now seemed different. The sharp edges were still there, but the contempt was gone. I couldn't help but think Kyle had something to do with that. Ever since Kyle squeezed his way into John's life, John had softened. Beneath all the gruffness, there was a good heart. And Kyle, he seemed almost glowing. Despite everything, he was happiest simply being near John. Their connection was beautiful, and I couldn't help but hope I'd get to see John finally give in to what he felt. I smiled watching Kyle claim the bed John was supposed to share with Nate. It was playful, bold, and a little reckless, so very Kyle. I wished I had that kind of confidence. My gaze shifted to Nathan as he gave up on fighting for the other bed and walked over to mine. Kyle had clearly won that battle. As Nate approached, my heart pounded, and I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the warmth rush through me. The bond one felt with him was even stronger than when we'd been locked in that cell together. We hadn't talked much since the escape, yet every time he was near me, it was overwhelming. I turned on my side to face him as he slipped under the sheets, lying back with his hands behind his head. I watched him in silence, memorizing every detail until he turned away, shutting me out again. I wanted so badly to speak, to bridge the distance between us. My lips parted more than once, but fear held me back. "Just spill it, Riley," Nate said suddenly, startling me. I just wanted to thank you," I whispered, "for helping me. I know it's a huge risk, but you're still here. That means a lot." Across the room, Kyle and John were arguing about personal space. I tried to ignore them as Nate turned to me. "Don't look at me like that," he said. "Like what?" "Like you're scared of me." His tone was firm, but not harsh. "I'm not scared. I don't want you to be angry with me." "I'm sorry for all of this," I admitted. "I'm not angry at you. I'm frustrated about what you've done. You didn't have to run. Now you're in deeper than you realize." I gave a small, dry laugh. "Sounds like you are angry. But even before all this, things weren't great. At least now, I feel like I have a chance. I can solve this, Nate. And with you all helping me, I might finally be free. Things aren't that simple, Riles." His voice softened. I'd missed hearing him call me by my nickname. Kyle has no case to solve. He'll still be a fugitive, and so will John and me. Even if you clear one charge, escaping is a crime on its own. He sounded exhausted, weighed down by everything. "I know. I didn't think it through. I just ran. And now, I can't go back. I'm sorry." Nate cut me off gently. "We'll figure it out somehow." I nodded, clinging to his words. To me, he was everything, my anchor in all this chaos. When he reached out and rested a hand on my cheek, I closed my eyes, soaking in the comfort. I whispered how much I missed him, even though he'd been by my side the whole time. He gave me that half smile I loved. "I'm right here." Then he leaned closer and kissed me. My heart exploded with emotion, but before things went further, I pulled back. His confusion was written all over his face as I brushed my fingers through his hair. "I told myself I wouldn't do this anymore," I whispered. "Do what?" "This. You know how I feel, Nate. And it doesn't go away. But it hurts to keep doing this when nothing will come of it. I don't want to settle for less than being truly loved." He studied me quietly, then finally turned onto his back, staring at the ceiling. "You're right. You shouldn't settle." His voice was soft, almost lost to the silence. I reached out one last time, running my hand through his hair. After a moment, he gently removed my hand, gave it a small squeeze, and turned away. He switched off the lamp, and our conversation ended. I stared up at the ceiling, my heart heavy. 15 minutes later, the quiet was broken when John grumbled, got up, and scooped Kyle right off the bed. Without effort, he carried him across the room and dropped him in the middle of the bed, between Nate and me. "You guys can have him," John muttered before heading back to his side. "Johnny, why do you have to be quiet and get some sleep?" Nate cut him off. His tone left no room for argument. Kyle huffed but stayed where he was, his head resting against my leg. I couldn't help but smile. Moments later, sleep finally claimed me. Chapter 24. We set out at night, disguised and keeping our heads low to avoid the strategically placed street cameras. The cold air wasn't the hardest part, it was the heavy atmosphere. Earlier, Nate had broken the news that Eddie was dying. By now, he was probably already gone. Even as the hours passed, I couldn't bring myself to accept it. Eddie, the only one who had cared about me when I first joined the crew. He was the man who spoke kindly to me when others didn't bother. One of the few I could honestly call a friend. The thought that he was gone felt impossible to grasp. I could picture him so clearly. His constant welcoming smile, his silly jokes, and the way his eyes lit up whenever he talked about the food we couldn't get in prison, double cheeseburgers and his favorite chocolate milkshake. I smiled sadly at the memory. I would miss him. Nathan carried on as though unchanged, but John was unusually quiet, even for him. After his initial shock at the news, he hadn't spoken a word. Kyle did his best to comfort him, leaning forward and keeping a hand on John's shoulder, whispering words I couldn't hear over the wind. Sometimes John nodded, but mostly he just stared ahead. Nate, on the other hand, looked unshaken. But then, Nate was always the strong one, the one to lean on in times of trouble. That was why he made such a good leader. "What happens when we get to the cabin?" I asked, breaking the silence. "We lay low for a few days, figure out our next plan of action." Nate glanced in the rearview mirror, then made a sharp right turn. "Do we really want to waste days just sitting around? Shouldn't we get started as soon as possible? We don't have much of a choice. If we don't plan carefully, we'll get caught." I nodded and leaned back in my seat. Nate and John knew what they were doing. I just had to trust that their choices would keep us safe. 2 left turns, a grocery stop, a long dirt driveway, and an hour and a half later, we were unloading bags from the car into a massive house in the middle of nowhere. When Nate said, "cabin," I'd pictured a small wooden place with a fireplace, no TV, and a single bedroom. But this looked like it had been plucked straight from the suburbs. White stone walls, a fully equipped kitchen, 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a television that probably cost more than my old car. The cupboards were stocked with canned food, and the fridge was packed with drinks. I helped Kyle put away groceries, my eyes wandering over the elegant decorations. I didn't bother asking Nate how he had access to a place like this. Somehow, I knew I wouldn't get an answer that satisfied me. "It's kinda cute, huh? My dad's cabins don't look like this," Kyle said, running his hand along the counter. "It's cool how they kept it simple." "Simple?" I raised an eyebrow. "This place is bigger than my own house." I shook my head, dropping a loaf of bread into the basket on the table. When I turned back, Kyle was leaning against the counter, lost in thought. "You okay, Kyle?" He blinked, then gave me a small smile. "Yeah. I was just thinking about my dad. I bet he's upset with me, after everything he did to help." I hadn't let myself think about that. Was Jerry worried? Disappointed? I wondered if Nate would ever let me make a quick call, just to let him know I was safe. But I already knew the answer. "I wish I could talk to him," Kyle admitted, "just to explain what happened." I tossed him a carton of milk, which he caught right before it slipped. "We'll get to talk to everyone we want once this is over," I reassured him. He shrugged, putting the carton in the fridge. "I don't have a case to solve, remember? I'm stuck either way." His voice was quieter than usual, and for the first time, I saw him shaken. Guilt washed over me as I watched him walk out of the room, leaving me to finish unpacking alone. "You didn't force any of us to come after you." "He'll be okay," Nate said as he walked in, dropping our bags on the floor. I studied him. "What about you? Will you be okay?" He looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm talking about Eddie. John's trying to hide how much it hurts, but we both know he's struggling. How are you? Eddie was like a brother to him. Nate's expression was unreadable as he picked an apple from the fruit bowl. Same as he was to you. I stepped closer. It's not wrong to grieve, Nate. We all lost someone important. It's okay to show it. He bit into the apple and walked to the other side of the counter. Eddie knew what he was getting into. He knew the risks, Nate said flatly. I frowned. No one expects to die when they go to prison, Nate. Don't be cold about this. He hesitated as though my words caught him off guard, then quickly masked his expression. He knew what he was doing when he broke the law. That's what got him there. Yeah, and so did you. And John. And Kyle. But that doesn't mean you deserve to die. Least of all Eddie. Whatever mistakes he made, he was still one of the kindest people I've ever known. My throat tightened. He didn't deserve this. I knew Nate heard me, but instead of replying, he tossed his half-eaten apple in the trash and walked out, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen. I sighed. 2 conversations in 10 minutes, and somehow, I'd managed to upset both Kyle and Nate. The television only worked for DVDs, so I picked one at random from a stack near the bookshelf, slipped it into the player, and sank onto the couch. I wasn't in the mood for a movie, but the silence was worse. As the screen flickered, my thoughts wandered. I thought of Jerry, of Eddie's family, of Kyle and the mess he was caught in. Then my mind drifted to the cabin itself and the question of how Nate and John had access to such a place. Did their past involve something bigger, maybe theft, or worse? Their first contact for help had been Ringo, who was clearly involved in shady dealings, but even that didn't feel right. I couldn't imagine either of them tied to drugs or crime rings. Still, you never really knew people as well as you thought. I sighed and sank lower into the couch. There was no point in overthinking. Jerry always said the present was the only thing that could change the future. Easier said than done. A chair scraped across the floor, pulling me out of my thoughts. John had left the dining table and was standing in front of the kitchen window, staring out. He looked deep in thought. I rose, intending to talk to him, but before I could, Kyle walked past. I reached out and gently caught his arm. He looked back at me in surprise, and I let go of his arm. I know this is hard for you, I said gently. I just want you to know I'm sorry for dragging you into this. I'll do everything I can to make sure things work out for you. We all will. Kyle shrugged. It's all right. I was just feeling sorry for myself earlier. I know it's going to work out. Don't worry about it. I nodded. How's John holding up? I don't know. You can never really tell with him. Kyle glanced over at the big guy standing by the window and shook his head. I just need to be there for him. Maybe he'll talk to me about it eventually. Yeah. I wasn't so sure of that, but who was I to dampen his optimism? I'm gonna get some sleep, he announced, starting to walk away. Kyle. He turned to face me. What if John doesn't want comfort? What if he doesn't want your help? Then I'll keep trying until he has no choice but to accept it. Things were always easier said than done. I made my way over to where John stood. I wasn't sure why. I risked him brushing me off, but I wanted to offer something. He had helped me so far. It felt right to try and be there for him. What are you thinking about? I asked in my brightest tone. He glanced at me briefly before turning back to the window. The escape, he said slowly. You don't just blow a hole in a prison wall and run away. It's never that simple. He leaned on the frame. It must have taken them months, maybe years, to plan it. There were only a few guards in the cafeteria that day. Usually there were more. I thought about his words. Then they blew up the wall, escaped, and not one guard followed us. Something doesn't add up. How could it have been that easy? We had a clear path from the prison straight into the woods, and not a single guard came after us. His voice tightened. This was really bothering him. It seemed like a conversation he should be having with Nate, something they could break down and analyze. For me, the only thing that mattered was that we were out. I didn't care how easy it had been or how long it had taken to plan. Though if I could choose between freedom and Eddie's life, I knew my friend would still be alive today. I don't know, I admitted. I'm just glad we're not trapped there anymore. And I'm glad you went after Kyle. That means everything to him. I offered a warm smile. John only grunted. "He's in love with you, you know." I stiffened but didn't respond. His next words made my smile fade completely. Love doesn't mean much when you're on the run. I thought about how sad it was that someone could believe that. I felt a pang of sympathy for Kyle. We sure knew how to choose complicated paths. Much later that night, when I was sure everyone was asleep, I slipped out of bed, leaving Kyle dozing peacefully. I headed for the kitchen, thinking about grabbing a snack. I don't know what made me glance out the window as I passed. Maybe the sound of rustling trees, or simply because I finally could. But when I did, I froze. Nathan was standing among the trees, not far from the house. From the weak glow of the porch light, I could just make out his figure. His back was to the house, his hands at his sides, his shoulders slumped. Something about his posture struck me. He looked so fragile, so weighed down. Alone, with only the night wind and the trees for company. My chest ached at the sight. For a moment, I just watched, wondering what he was thinking. Then, as he turned his head for a brief second, I saw it. His face, shadowed and faintly lit, carried raw anguish, so sharp and unguarded that it made my heart clench. I couldn't stay inside. I opened the porch door and stepped out into the cold air. "Nate," I called softly. His back stiffened, his fists tightening, but he didn't move. "Go back inside," he said firmly. His voice carried something unfamiliar, a heaviness, a tremor beneath the command. "Nate, I said go back inside, Riley." This time, the pain was unmistakable, woven into the edges of his words. I took a few more steps forward, unwilling to back down. "Just tell me what's..." He spun around, his face alive with anger. "What's wrong with you?" he snapped. I froze for a moment, but then I saw it. Beneath the sharpness of his tone, his eyes held it. The grief, the torment etched so deeply it seemed unbearable. My heart sank. Without thinking, I closed the distance and wrapped my arms tightly around him, clinging as if I could hold him together. He tensed, his hands landing on my shoulders as if to push me away. "It's okay, Nate," I whispered against his chest. "He was your friend. It's okay to let it out. Just this once." I held on tighter, offering comfort even if he didn't want it. "It's okay. We all loved him. We'll all miss him." I said it again and again until, finally, the strength seemed to drain out of him. With a shudder, Nate sank to the ground, no longer able to hold himself up. I knelt in the grass beside him, steadying him as his head dropped onto my shoulder. His hands gripped my arms tightly, his nails digging in. "Eddie," he murmured brokenly. And then I felt it, the wetness of his tears soaking through my shirt, his shoulders shaking as he wept. For the first time since I had known him, Nate's walls crumbled. He broke apart in my arms, grieving with the weight of a man who had lost a brother. It took strength to hold in so much pain. And I was willing to be his strength, just this once. Sometimes, a person simply needed to let go and be human. So, I stayed, holding him through the storm of his sorrow, reminding him it was okay. Chapter 25. I woke the next morning wrapped from neck to toes in what felt like a mountain of blankets, cushioned by the softness of the mattress. Warmth and comfort surrounded me, and I snuggled deeper into the cocoon, reluctant to open my eyes and risk losing the rare feeling of tranquility. The silence was soothing, broken only by the faint scent of pine drifting through a partially open window. For a moment, it felt like heaven. I smiled to myself, content, until the memories of last night came rushing back. Nathan. The peace I felt shattered instantly, replaced by an ache in my chest. I thought about the look on his face the night before, the weight of his grief pressing him down until he seemed almost paralyzed. I had never seen anyone in so much pain, and it hurt to even remember it. I had held him for what felt like hours, until his tears finally subsided and exhaustion had claimed him. He'd followed me back to his room, lost and hollow, while I tucked him into bed. Without a word, I'd stayed beside him, eventually wrapping an arm around him and resting my face against his chest, listening to the uneven beat of his heart until sleep took us both. Now I woke alone, still wrapped in his blankets but reaching across the sheets to where he had been. The space was cool. He had left hours ago. Sighing, I sat up and finally looked around the room. Like the rest of the so-called cabin, it was furnished with a kind of polished luxury that felt too perfect, like a hotel, comfortable but impersonal. No family photos. No signs of a life lived here. Just beauty without warmth. I wished I understood more about Nate, about where this place came from, what shaped him into the person he was, what led to his incarceration. I wished he trusted me enough to share those pieces of himself. Still, the trust he had shown me last night was something. Maybe even the beginning of something more. Reluctantly, I climbed out of bed, shivering as my feet touched the cool floor. After a quick shower and brushing my teeth in the room I shared with Kyle, empty now, I followed the smell of coffee and sizzling food toward the kitchen. The scent of bacon and eggs made my mouth water. It had been far too long since I'd had a breakfast like that. But when I stepped inside, the sight was odd. Bacon and eggs were frying away on the stove, but no one was cooking. I poured myself a cup of coffee, adding milk and sugar, then glanced out the window. On the porch, Kyle sat on the railing, a cigarette between his fingers. "Hey, what's up?" I asked a few minutes later, stepping onto the porch to join him. Kyle looked up and smiled warmly. "Nothing much. Just taking in the view." He gestured toward the forest stretching around us, then gave me a teasing grin, wiggling his eyebrows. "You didn't come back to bed last night," he said playfully. I shook my head, rolling my eyes. "It's not what you're thinking. Nate just needed my help with something." I took a sip of coffee. He raised his brows, still grinning. "I'm sure he did." Ignoring his teasing, I asked, "Where is everybody anyway?" "There's breakfast cooking with no one watching it." "Nate's the one cooking. John's not up yet." "I tried knocking on his door this morning, but it's locked." Kyle pulled a face, pouting dramatically. I laughed. "That's probably because you won't stop bothering him." Kyle rolled his eyes, taking another drag from the cigarette. "Since when do you smoke?" I asked. "Since always. I just never had any in prison." He pulled out a whole pack from his pocket and held it up. "Found these in the bedside table." I shook my head with a small laugh. "So, what's the plan for today?" "No idea. I'm gonna try to convince them to let me call my dad," Kyle said. "That's never going to happen. Don't waste your time." "John will listen," he said confidently. I leaned against the porch wall, sipping my coffee. "Where'd you get that?" The sudden voice made me jump, almost spilling my drink. John stood in the doorway, wearing only jeans and boots, his t-shirt dangling from one hand. He pulled it on smoothly as Kyle's whole face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "Hey, John. Wait, what are you doing?" Kyle asked when John walked over, plucked the cigarette from his fingers, and tossed it to the ground. John calmly crushed the embers under his boot. "Those things will kill you," John said simply, then turned to gaze out at the trees. Kyle frowned. "There are a million other things out there that could kill me. I'll take my chances." He fumbled for another cigarette, but John was quicker, snatching the pack right out of his hands. "Give that back," Kyle demanded, grabbing at John's shirt as he tried to reach around him. John held the pack easily out of reach while Kyle struggled. I couldn't help but laugh. They looked like two oversized kids fighting over a toy. "If you two are done making a scene, breakfast is ready," Nate's voice cut in from behind us. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, coffee in hand, watching the whole display with an expression of calm boredom. I swallowed hard, studying Nate's expression. Surprisingly, he looked completely fine. There was no trace of the breakdown he'd had the night before, no visible grief for his fallen friend. "Hey, Nate," I said slowly. He finally glanced down at me, his face unreadable. "Hey, you should get something to eat. We've got a lot to do today." He gave a quick glance toward Kyle and John, who were still bickering, then turned to head inside. I drained my coffee and followed after him. "Are you okay?" I asked as we stood side by side, serving ourselves food. He paused, looking at me. "Is there a reason I shouldn't be?" He seemed the same as always, calm, collected, in control. "No, it's just that last night was a momentary lapse," he said simply, his mouth tightening. "It won't happen again." I shook my head. "It wasn't weakness, Nate. It's okay to grieve for someone you cared about." He didn't respond right away, focusing instead on his meal and pouring another cup of coffee. Then, finally, he turned to me. "Thanks." The look in his eyes told me the word meant more than just gratitude for what I had said, it was also for being there for him last night. I smiled softly and nodded. I'd been wrong when I thought Nate had gone back to being his usual self. Yes, he was still controlled, still gruff and almost emotionless on the surface. He still barked orders at Kyle and me, keeping us in line. But as the morning wore on, I noticed something different, something subtle in the way he looked at me. It was as though he was seeing me in a completely new light. Every glance carried a weight I couldn't decipher, as if he saw something in me he didn't quite understand. It left me unsettled, wondering what was going through his mind, and worrying that I might not want to know. After the dishes were cleared, the workday began. Nate and John sat side by side at the small dining table, each with a notebook and pen. I sat across from them, hands clasped together, while Kyle lounged next to me, happily munching on an apple. Then came the questions. Once again, I was asked to recount every detail I could remember about that night. Nate and John occasionally stopped to jot down notes, bouncing theories off each other, and I found myself thinking they would have made good detectives. "You said everyone who came through the door that night signed a yearbook?" John asked. I nodded. Yeah. It was a "we're done with high school" party, supposed to be fun. Everyone who walked in signed a yearbook hanging on the wall. And the guest list? Was it only your classmates? I shook my head. No, people could invite their friends too. John looked at Nate. So, if the real killer was there that night, there's a chance their name is in that book. Nate frowned. But even then, with over 100 people at the party, sifting through every name would be risky and time-consuming. We can't just visit them all. Not to mention, John added, we don't have the resources. Nate dragged a hand through his hair, frustration flashing across his face. He tapped his pen against the pad, then looked at me. Tell me about your mom's boyfriend. I hesitated. What do you want to know? What was he like? Did he have enemies? And why exactly was he at the party that night? That's easy, I said flatly. He was abusive. Spent all his money on alcohol and drugs, usually drunk more than sober. I wouldn't be surprised if he had enemies, but I don't know who. And like I said, he was at the party looking for my mom. But why come to you? Nate pressed. If they were together, why not call her? Or wait for her at home? I shrugged. He was drunk. Probably wasn't thinking clearly. Anything else stand out about him that night? Did he seem nervous? Angry? I bit my lip, trying to remember. No more than usual. Nothing that stood out. John and Nate exchanged a look, as if communicating silently. So, let's go over this again, John said. You went to a house party thrown by someone you didn't know. Your mom's boyfriend crashed it, drunk, and pulled you aside asking where she was. You threatened him, he pushed you pushed him back, and he fell. Then you left. I nodded. Instead of going home, you went for a walk in the park. By the time you did get home, it was late, the house was empty, and nothing seemed out of place. A week later, the police came, found the murder weapon in your room, and arrested you. Again I nodded. And then it came out that your mom had been with Jerry and some friends that night, giving her an alibi, but leaving you without one, John finished. The whole summary made me sound guilty. My chest tightened, and I rubbed my hands together slowly. I just don't see what you two can do that the police couldn't, I muttered, feeling hopeless. They already investigated. They found me guilty. No offense, but you're just two men who escaped prison. I'm starting to think this is pointless. The detectives stopped investigating the moment they found the weapon with your prints, Nate said firmly. They thought the case was solved. That was their mistake. We're going to pick up where they left off. We'll figure this out. His voice softened, and he offered me a reassuring smile. I tried to return it, but it faltered. So, what now? Kyle finally spoke up. Now we follow the only lead we have, John replied. I looked at him, confused. Which is? He met my eyes. We'll have to pay your mother a visit. Chapter 26. John's POV. These days, if I managed to get even a wink of sleep, it felt like a blessing. Too many thoughts, Too many emotions I didn't want to deal with, hopes and fears alike, kept me awake, staring at the ceiling of my too large room. Tonight was no different. By morning, Nate and I would be heading out to question the kid's mother, but my mind was on everything except that meeting. I rubbed my thumb against the palm of my hand, a nervous habit I couldn't seem to stop, as my thoughts circled back to Eddie, my friend, my brother. I still refused to believe he was gone. A man like him deserved the years ahead, deserved a family, a chance to grow old surrounded by laughter and love. He didn't deserve to have his life cut short, not without his friends there to offer comfort. Nate might have accepted it, but Nate was always the realist. He dealt with the facts in front of him, while I clung to hope. I couldn't let go, not of Eddie. Every time I closed my eyes, memories of him came rushing in. I'd practically begged Nate not to send him on that assignment. Eddie had too much heart, too much kindness, for undercover work. And now my worst fears had become reality. The ache in my chest grew sharper at the thought of him being gone, but I forced myself to push it aside. If Eddie really was gone, then the least I could do was make sure Nate stayed safe. That meant I had to focus on tomorrow, not drown in thoughts I couldn't change. I tried to shift my mind elsewhere, like the ease of our prison escape. It had been too smooth, almost as if someone on the inside had helped. If that were true, then who had the power to pull it off? My suspicion kept circling back to the warden, but even that didn't make sense. Why would a man risk his own career and reputation by orchestrating something so reckless? None of it added up. Johnny. I stiffened at the soft whisper outside my door. Johnny, are you awake? He jiggled the door handle, testing if it was locked. I clenched my jaw. I didn't have the patience for him tonight. Johnny. His knocking wasn't loud, but in the heavy silence of this place, it felt amplified. I groaned and glared at the ceiling. Kyle was becoming a constant, unwanted presence in my life. Always there, always pushing. I can feel you glaring through the door, he teased. Open up. I have something to tell you. Then tell me and go to bed, I called back. He paused, then I heard a faint thud, like he'd leaned against the door. Trust me, John, you don't want me shouting this out here. Unless, of course, you'd like the others to know our business. Our business? The kid was delusional. Tell me in the morning. It's freezing out here. Just open the door, I'll say what I need to say, and then I'll leave. Promise. I rolled my eyes. A promise from Kyle wasn't worth much. When he grew quiet, I imagined him sitting on the floor, stubborn as ever. After a few minutes of silence, I sighed. Kyle? No answer. Cursing under my breath, I threw off the covers and unlocked the door. Sure enough, Kyle had been leaning against it, and he fell forward onto the floor. He looked up at me with a sheepish grin. Say what you need to say and go, I muttered. Instead of answering, he darted past me, climbed into my bed, and made himself comfortable. I rubbed my forehead, exhausted. I didn't have the energy to fight him tonight, not with Eddie's memory and tomorrow's meeting already weighing on me. Closing the door, I sat heavily in the chair by the closet, propping my head in my hand. Kyle watched me with a pout. You okay? Don't I look okay? I replied dryly. He shrugged. You look sad. Are you thinking about Eddie? His tone softened, genuine concern in his eyes. No, I said sharply. I'm thinking I need sleep and you're keeping me up. I miss him too, Kyle admitted quietly. He was really kind. His gaze grew distant. I remember when he... Stop talking about him like he's gone, I snapped, my voice harsher than I intended. Kyle blinked. But Nate said... Forget what Nate said, I cut in. There's no way Eddie's gone. My words faltered when Kyle smiled at me gently. I looked away, jaw tight. Kyle's voice softened further. You know what I think? People see you as this grumpy guy who hates everyone and wants to be left alone. But that's not what I see. I rubbed a hand over my head, refusing to meet his eyes. I think you're one of the kindest people I know, he continued. You care even when you act like you don't. And more than that, I think you're lonely. I finally looked at him, irritated. That's what you came here to tell me? That I'm lonely? He shook his head. No. I came because I like being around you. I frowned. Why? He rolled his eyes like it was obvious. Because I love you, John. The words hung in the air between us. Bold, direct, unapologetic. It's fine, he added quickly. Don't freak out. I don't expect you to say it back. I already know you care about me too. I stared at him, caught between disbelief and resignation. Kyle rarely listened to me, and something told me this wouldn't be any different. He snuggled further under my blanket, smug as ever. I've known for a while now, actually. Have you now? I muttered, my sarcasm wasted on him. Yup, he said with a satisfied grin. With a sigh, I gave up fighting him. There were too many battles in my life already. Eddie, the escape, tomorrow's meeting, and Kyle's feelings were just another complication. I crawled into bed beside him, pulling my pillow away from him. You planning on going back to your own room anytime soon? I asked, already knowing the answer. I'm staying here, he said simply. Of course he was. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, forcing my mind to quiet. When Kyle shifted closer, I shot him a warning look. Don't even think about it. He froze, sighed, and settled again. Still, I could feel his warmth beside me, his steady breathing filling the silence. And despite myself, I felt my body relax. Then, in the dim light, he whispered, I think we should stop pretending. Go to sleep, I muttered. But instead of arguing, he reached out, his hand brushing lightly against mine. My instinct was to pull away, but something in his touch made me pause. Stop running from what's right in front of you, he said softly. Before I could react, he leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. It was gentle, warm, and unexpected. For a moment, my mind screamed at me to pull away. But my heart betrayed me. And as his closeness surrounded me, I realized I wasn't fighting him anymore. 100 reasons why this was wrong ran through my mind. For once though, I didn't do the logical thing. Instead of listening to reason, I chose to follow what I felt. I reached up, running my hand through his short hair, holding onto the closeness of the moment. He shivered under my touch and I deepened the kiss. Just this once, I told myself. One night where I let go. One night where I allowed myself to forget all the fears and burdens pressing down on me. I don't want to hurt you, I murmured when I finally broke away for air. The words felt heavy, but he only shook his head, determined. I'm not fragile, Johnny. I can handle myself, Kyle said with surprising confidence, his eyes shining with conviction as he leaned closer again. The way he looked at me was enough to push away the last of my hesitation. All the walls I'd built up crumbled, and for once, I let myself stop fighting. The next morning, I woke feeling strangely calm. I stretched, checked the time, and waited for regret to sink in. But it never came. Instead, there was only a quiet emptiness, one I couldn't quite name. I turned my head. Kyle was still fast asleep beside me, his messy hair falling over his forehead, his expression softened in rest. For a long moment I just watched him, unsure of how I was supposed to feel. Unsure of what came next. He didn't stir when I slipped from the bed, gathered my clothes, and went to the bathroom. By breakfast, he still hadn't come out, so I forced myself to focus on Nate instead. We had an important task ahead, meeting Riley's mother. Visiting her at her workplace would be safer than her home, where neighbors might notice strangers. Still, Riley worried she'd call the police the moment she saw us. We'll wear disguises. It'll be fine. We've got everything covered, Nate assured him, calm as always. Riley looked doubtful but eventually quieted. We finished breakfast in silence. Every now and then, Riley glanced at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, as if we were sharing some secret only he understood. I ignored it and went to sit on the couch with my food. By the time Kyle finally appeared, I was halfway through an old DVD I'd found. He walked in smiling, holding a plate of food, and dropped onto the couch beside me. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "Morning," I muttered, eyes still on the screen. "Think you guys could bring back some ice cream on your way back?" he asked casually, biting into his sandwich. I sighed. "We're not going shopping, Kyle. We're going to talk to Riley's mom and then coming straight back. This isn't a game." He only grinned. Chocolate, and it's been forever since I had any candy. I gave him a flat look. He just kept chewing happily, unfazed. Instead of arguing, I shook my head and turned back to the movie. Yeah, sure, I said under my breath. When it was time to leave, Nate gave Riley the usual warnings. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone. Don't make noise. And only use this phone if there's an emergency, he said, handing him a cheap cell phone. I packed our gear into the trunk. When I turned back, I nearly bumped into Kyle, who was standing there with worry written all over his face. Without a word, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. For a second, I froze. Then, awkwardly, I patted his head. Be careful, okay? He said softly before pulling back. I only gave a short nod before climbing into the driver's seat. A moment later, Nate joined me, and we drove off. It took us about 2.5 hours to reach the city. We stopped at Nate's apartment to grab our suits and badges before heading to the restaurant where Riley's mother worked. The place was small, the kind of bed and breakfast style diner that looked like it had seen better days. The smell of oil and old gravy hung in the air, and the worn furniture spoke of years of use. Nate led the way with his usual calm authority. Soon, the manager escorted us to a quiet corner in the back. There, we met Riley's mother for the first time. She was a tall woman with tired eyes and dark circles beneath them, as though sleep hadn't come easily in a long time. Her dark hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and her scarred hands were clasped tightly together as she sat. After brief introductions, we got straight to the point. She believed we were FBI agents investigating her son's case, and we let her keep believing that, because, in truth, we were. I understand you've spoken to officers before, but we'd like you to clarify a few things, Mrs. Parker, Nate began. She nodded, though her wariness was clear. She answered our procedural questions patiently. Then came the part that made me lean forward. Could you run through the statement you gave the police the night your boyfriend was killed? Missed. Her eyes flickered in confusion. She tilted her head. You mean my husband? Nate and I exchanged a quick glance. Pardon me? My husband, she repeated firmly. I didn't have a boyfriend. And I should have corrected you earlier. I go by Cheryl Menza, not Parker. Parker is my maiden name. Joseph and I were separated, yes, but he was still my husband. I fought to keep my face neutral, though my mind was reeling. Let me get this straight, I said carefully. Riley Parker, he's your son? She nodded. Yes. But his real name isn't Parker. It's Menza. Nate leaned in, his voice low. Are you saying that Joseph Menza, the man Riley was convicted of murdering, was his father? She looked between us, almost surprised at the question. Of course, didn't you read the police report? By the time we left the restaurant, two things were clear. First, Cheryl Menza was innocent. Whatever had happened, she had no part in her husband's death. And second, the truth was far more complicated than we thought. Riley hadn't just been convicted of killing a man. He had been convicted of killing his own father. This doesn't make sense, Nate muttered as we headed back to the car. I shook my head, unable to find the words. This case was getting more twisted by the second. Chapter 27. John's POV. I gave him 30 minutes of silence before finally speaking my mind. During that time, Nate gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes fixed on the road as we sped through the streets. The news from earlier had left us both unsettled. As much as I wanted to give Riley the benefit of the doubt, the thought kept creeping back. Maybe he wasn't as innocent as we believed. Maybe we need to consider the possibility that Riley isn't telling us the whole truth, I said into the silence. Nate's eyes flicked away from the road for a brief moment, landing on me with a sharp, critical stare. Don't start with that, he muttered. I shook my head. Why else wouldn't he tell us? He's had so much time, and he's kept it hidden. He's covering something up, and it could turn out bigger than either of us expect. You're wrong. He's innocent. I frowned. You've never been one to jump to conclusions without all the facts. All I'm saying is we need to at least consider the possibility and prepare for it. I don't need to consider anything, Nate insisted. I know Riley. This has to be a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I raised my voice slightly. Nate, he changed his name. He was convicted of murdering his own father, and he never told us. That's not a small thing to hide. Nate's jaw tightened. He must have a good explanation. He took a sharp turn, and the seatbelt pressed hard into my neck. I clenched my fists, frustration bubbling inside me. You've always been the best at staying logical and unbiased, and now you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. That's not true, he shot back. I've been good at my job because I give it everything I've got. And where is this coming from, John? You thought Riley was innocent too, that's why you're here? No, I'm here to keep you alive. You think I'd risk my life, my career, for someone I don't trust? The kid could be playing us, and I'll get to the bottom of it. Another sharp turn made the car jerk. Nate's glare was sharp enough to cut through steel. I'm handling this, he warned. You lay a hand on him and what? You're threatening me now. I said I'll handle it. I believe in him. I exhaled, forcing myself to calm down. All I'm saying is, if he isn't innocent, we'll have to decide what to do about it. Nate muttered, You've always been a cynic. Yeah, and you used to be right there with me. But ever since that boy showed up, you've changed. I can hardly recognize you anymore. He stayed quiet, eyes fixed on the road. I can still do my job, John, he said finally. And I'm telling you, I know Riley. I've spent months with him. There's no way he could have done something like this. I shook my head. No, you only think you know him. That was when the car hit a pothole. There was a loud pop, and suddenly we were swerving across the street, narrowly missing a speeding truck. We spun out of control before coming to a shaky stop on the grassy shoulder of the road. My heart hammered in my chest. Nate still had a death grip on the wheel. You okay? I asked. He glared at me, unbuckled, and got out of the car. I followed. We've got a flat, he called, staring down at the shredded remains of the front tire. Leaning against the car, Nate folded his arms and finally spoke. I get it, John. It doesn't make sense for Riley to keep something like this secret, unless it's something serious. But listen to me, I've seen who he really is. He's good. I can't explain it, but I know. I stayed quiet, letting him finish. If it was anyone else, maybe I'd think like you. But Riley's different. You can't find people like him anymore. Eddie was good too, I reminded him. And if he had lied to us the way Riley has, I'd question him just the same. Eddie's gone, Nate said softly. Something in me snapped. I lashed out, my fist connecting with his mouth. His head jerked back, and he stumbled. You've changed, Nate, I said, anger lacing every word. And I don't know if it's for the better. Blood at the corner of his lip, he wiped it away with the back of his hand. I've changed because I'm choosing to believe someone can still be innocent. I shook my head. Stop letting your feelings get in the way. We need to focus on why we're here, not on what Riley means to you. He's been lying, and right now, he doesn't deserve blind defense. Nate turned away, raking a hand through his hair, kicking at the dirt. Then he turned back, eyes burning with conviction. I love him, he said. The words hit me like a blow. I shook my head. You're all losing your minds. He didn't answer, just shoved his hands in his pockets. So, I asked, if it turns out he is guilty, Nate, what will you do? As an agent of the law, you'd be required to turn him in. Can you do that? He hesitated. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked confidence. Then I'll turn him in. I shook my head. No. Your hesitation told me everything I needed to know. His eyes blazed. And what about you, John? What will you do if Kyle ends up facing consequences for his escape? Do you think he'd survive prison? You think he can handle it alone? The question left me speechless. That's different, I muttered. No, it's not, Nate shot back. You can't even answer me. I've seen the way you look at him. You're just as caught up as I am. Grinding my teeth, I joined him in changing the tire, both of us working in silence. The rest of the drive passed without a word. When we finally reached the cabin, we slammed our doors and walked inside. Riley sat perched on the arm of a chair, watching a movie. He glanced up, and when his eyes found Nate, he gave him a small, shy smile. I dropped my duffel bag near the door and looked toward Kyle, lounging on the couch. His face lit up when our eyes met. I quickly looked away. "What happened to your face?" Riley asked, walking up to Nate and hesitantly reaching toward his bruised lip. "It's nothing," Nate replied quickly. "Riley, we met your mom today and..." He trailed off. "And what?" Riley asked nervously. Nate glanced at me, then back at him. "Let's go for a walk," he suggested. Riley nodded, though not with much enthusiasm. "What's going on?" Kyle asked once they stepped outside. He had moved closer, his brow furrowed as he looked at me. "You'll find out soon enough," I muttered, sinking into a chair and dragging a hand across my face. As my mind spun with possibilities, Kyle came up behind me and wrapped his arms loosely around my shoulders, his cheek brushing against mine. And because everything already felt like it was falling apart, I let him. Chapter 28. Riley's POV. "Watch your step," Nathan warned, just as I nearly tripped over a tree root. I caught myself, stepped over it, and quickened my pace so I was walking right behind him again. He didn't seem to be in the best mood. Then again with Nate, it was often hard to tell. Still, the way he and John had walked through the cabin door earlier, both of them looking angrier than I'd ever seen, had me nervous. This walk, Nate suggested, wasn't doing much to calm me either. "Nate," I called cautiously. His tone sounded distant, like he was deep in thought. "Where are we going?" "We're just walking," he replied, glancing back briefly before moving on. I bit my lip, glancing around at the thick trees and then up at the open sky. The woods were peaceful, filled with birdsong and fresh air. But inside, my chest was tight, weighed down with unease. "Why do you look so worried?" he asked, suddenly stopping ahead of me. I froze when his eyes met mine. Those sharp, intelligent eyes seemed to see right through me. "Do I?" I tried to laugh lightly, but it came out shaky. The truth was, I knew why. They had visited my mother. I could see it written all over Nate's expression. She wouldn't have held back. Of course, she would have told them the same story she told anyone willing to listen. That her son was guilty of killing his own father. I looked away, heart pounding. If Nate had already decided I was guilty, there wasn't much I could do. I had spent years trying to convince people otherwise, and I didn't have the strength to start again. Slowly, I sank down against the trunk of a tree, bracing myself for whatever was coming. He stood across from me, waiting. Watching. "Is there something you need to tell me?" he finally asked. I shook my head. "John and I spoke with your mother today," he said firmly. "We learned some things." I picked up a twig, snapping it in half over and over until Nate reached down, gently taking the pieces from my hands. That forced me to look up. "What exactly did she tell you?" I whispered, staring at his nose rather than his eyes. "Riley," he said, voice firm, "stop hiding. Tell me what you're keeping from us." "I didn't kill anyone," I blurted out. "I didn't ask you that." "What's the point?" I muttered. "You already think I'm guilty. It doesn't even matter." "Don't play games, Riley. This is serious," he cut in, his tone sharp with frustration. I drew a shaky breath. "It's not as big as you think. My name isn't Parker. It's Menza. Riley Menza. Parker is my mom's maiden name." I risked a glance at him. He was watching me closely, his expression unreadable. "I didn't want his name," I admitted quietly. "The man who died, he was my father. And I hated him." The words sounded bitter, even to me. But they were true. Nate crouched down so we were eye to eye. "Because he hurt your mother," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. I was startled by the understanding in his tone. "He hurt both of us," I said bitterly. "He was cruel, always angry, and never cared about what he was doing to us. But no matter what, my mom kept taking him back. It felt like she didn't care if he destroyed us. She loved him too much. And I hated him for it. For everything. But I swear, I didn't kill him." Despite the empathy in Nate's gaze, I shook my head. He couldn't possibly understand what it had been like living with that man, or what it felt like to be relieved when he was finally gone. "Then help me understand," Nate urged softly. "Tell me about him." "No," I said firmly. "Riley. No, don't you see?" This is why I changed my name. To escape him. To escape the memories. I don't want to keep reliving it. I just want to forget. Nate stayed calm in the face of my outburst. Changing your name won't erase the past. You won't forget. You'll just learn to live beyond it. And keeping it locked inside will only make it harder to move on. I snapped, easy for you to say. But the bitterness faded almost instantly, replaced by regret. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Regardless, he continued, you can't keep secrets from us, not while we're trying to help you. Even the smallest detail matters in this case. Do you understand? I nodded, guilt weighing heavily on me. I wanted to tell you all eventually, but I thought saying something this late would make me look guilty. Yeah, Nate said dryly, and keeping quiet made things worse. John thinks you've been playing us all along. Now you need to tell him and Kyle the truth. They deserve that. I nodded again. Nate stood, then stretched out his hand to help me up. I took it gratefully. Still holding my hand, he met my eyes with unwavering intensity. Is there anything else you're hiding? He asked. Tell me now, because if more secrets come out later, that's it. We won't be able to keep helping you. I shook my head quickly. No, nothing else. I swear. At last, everything was out. I felt drained but lighter. We returned to the cabin soon after. I felt sick with dread, mostly about what Kyle would think. Would he still believe me after this lie? Even though my reason had been to escape my father's shadow, in Nate's eyes it had been pointless. And it only made me look guilty. Walking behind Nate, I found myself studying him. His reaction had surprised me. Once, the Nathan I met months ago would have exploded with anger. But now he'd shown patience and understanding I hadn't expected. Something in him had changed. Before I could dwell on it further, we reached the back porch. I stopped, drawing in a deep breath to steady my nerves. There's no way John's going to believe me, I murmured. That's on you, Nate replied simply, his words as blunt as ever. I pushed past Nate and entered the cabin, making my way through the kitchen until I stopped at the entrance of the family room. Nate followed behind me, leaning casually against the wall with his arms crossed. Together, we silently observed the scene in front of us. Neither Kyle nor John noticed us standing there. I didn't say anything right away, torn between announcing myself and figuring out how to apologize for keeping secrets from two people who had only ever wanted to help me. They were seated on the largest couch in the room, John at one end, with Kyle perched on the armrest beside him. John held a small piece of wood in one hand and a pocket knife in the other, carefully whittling it down while Kyle watched with fascination. Shouldn't you cut this part off? Kyle asked, reaching out to touch the wood. John's hand froze just in time to keep the blade from nicking Kyle's finger. He shot him an annoyed look. You want to keep that finger? Kyle quickly pulled his hand back, cheeks flushing as he gave John a sheepish smile. John shook his head and returned to carving. I glanced at Nate. He was watching them with a strange expression, one I couldn't quite read. A part of me wanted to lean on him, to ask him to explain everything on my behalf, to make them understand that I hadn't meant any harm. But after everything these men had done for me, after the risks they had taken, I knew they deserved to hear the truth directly from me. Still, the thought of saying it aloud again, of admitting my connection to the man I was accused of killing, made my chest tighten. Every time I had been forced to tell the story with the police, with my lawyer, in the courtroom, even with Nate, it felt like reopening an old wound. I had changed my name years ago to escape it, to become someone new, but no matter how far I tried to run, the past always found me. Wait, you're giving this to me? Kyle's voice broke my thoughts. I turned just in time to see John hand over the finished carving. Kyle accepted it with a reverence that almost made me smile. Don't really have much use for it, John said with a shrug. He placed the knife on the coffee table and brushed wood shavings to the side. When he bent down to pick up a pillow from the floor, he spotted me. His body stiffened, and he straightened with arms crossed tightly across his chest. His eyes met mine, sharp and unforgiving. My throat went dry. Oh hey guys, Kyle greeted cheerfully when he noticed us. I tried to smile back, but John's expression made me shove my hands into my pockets and bite my lip nervously. Before I start, I just want to say this. I didn't kill him. I'm innocent. I've never lied about that, I blurted, my voice defensive. John's glare remained unchanged, while Kyle looked confused. What's going on? Cuz. John's voice was clipped. He lied to us. The man he was convicted of murdering was his father. The only reason we didn't realize it sooner was because he changed his name. Kyle's eyes widened as he looked between us. Wait, seriously? Riley, why didn't you say something? His voice held more shock than anger, though John seemed angry enough for both of them. I glanced at Nate, silently begging for help, but he just stood quietly, observing. It was on me. Yeah, I know. I should have told you, I said quickly. I swear, I didn't think it mattered to the case. It's just, after everything with him, my dad, I couldn't. My words faltered, frustration rising in my chest. Kyle set the carving aside and turned toward me fully. Well, if I had a dad like that, I'd want to change my name too. But to carry that alone all this time? That's wow. He shook his head, still trying to process it. Then he looked at me with surprising gentleness. I get it. I just wish you'd told us. Relief flooded me at his words, and I couldn't help but grin at him. He returned a sad but understanding smile. John, however, wasn't convinced. That's it? That's the reason you changed your name? And you thought that wasn't important enough to tell us? I don't believe you. His tone was harsh, cutting. I knew I couldn't leave it at that. So, I took a deep breath and told them everything, details I had only ever shared with Nate, and even some I hadn't. Memories of my childhood, my father's cruelty, the things that had pushed me to change my name and bury the past. By the time I finished, my throat felt raw, and I still couldn't tell whether John believed me. He just stared for a long moment, then muttered something under his breath before storming out of the room. The silence that followed was heavy. Kyle offered me a warm smile, and Nate left quietly, saying he'd fix us something to eat. When I was finally alone with Kyle, he motioned for me to sit beside him on the couch. His grin returned. Okay, I told myself I wasn't going to say this, but I have to tell someone. John and well, we're kind of a thing now. His voice brimmed with excitement, and just like that, the tension that had weighed on me lifted a little. I laughed. Yeah, that's not exactly a secret. These walls aren't as thick as you think. He chuckled, eyes softening as he leaned back. It's just different with him. He actually made me feel like I mattered. Not many people have done that for me. His voice carried both joy and vulnerability. John and sweet weren't words I would normally put together, but the way Kyle said it made me smile. Come on, Kyle teased. You've got Nate, Mr. Serious, never smiles, always in control, scary half the time. But John? He's perfect. I shook my head, amused. Trust me, Kyle, I don't have Nate. He's in a world of his own. Later that night, I should have known Nate wasn't coming back. He had left the room earlier with his pillow tucked under his arm, and while at first I thought I'd enjoy the whole bed to myself, the silence soon turned into loneliness. Hours passed, and I could hear the faint hum of Kyle and John talking down the hall. Their muffled voices only made the cabin feel emptier. After nearly an hour of debating with myself, I finally got up, my heart racing as I walked to Nate's room. Slowly, I pushed the door open. He was asleep. The soft glow of moonlight slipped through the curtains, outlining his figure against the bed. His face looked peaceful, lips parted slightly, his breathing calm and steady. I stood there for a moment, unable to move, mesmerized by the rise and fall of his chest and the way his tousled hair rested against the white pillow. Everything about him seemed so still, so unreachable. My heart ached with the weight of feelings I kept buried, feelings that only grew stronger when I saw him like this, unguarded, vulnerable, and quietly beautiful. Riles? I nearly jumped at the sound of his voice. His eyelids fluttered open halfway, his brows furrowing in confusion as he blinked at me. What's wrong? His voice was thick with sleep. Nothing, I said quickly. My voice wavered as I stepped closer. I just wondered if maybe you wanted company. He shifted, making space for me on the bed without hesitation. I smiled in relief and slipped beneath the covers. The warmth of where he had been lying immediately wrapped around me, grounding me in a strange, comforting way. When I turned on my side to face him, he was already asleep again. I nestled closer, my chest tightening with longing. I missed him, missed us. I missed the quiet comfort of being near him, the way his presence could make me feel safe. It hurt to have him so close yet know I couldn't truly reach him. My hand hovered, hesitant, before I let my fingers trace lightly along his hairline and down the curve of his cheek. He didn't stir, so I allowed myself another moment, brushing my fingertips along the rough stubble on his jaw. I pulled back quickly, afraid of crossing a line I couldn't uncross. "You done?" My breath caught. Heat rushed to my face. "You were awake the whole time?" His grin spread slowly as his eyes opened fully, amusement shining there. "I'm a light sleeper." "I hate you," I muttered, horrified at being caught. But his grin only widened. For a moment, I saw something rare, Nathan's full smile, unguarded and real. The air between us shifted, charged with unspoken words. His gaze lingered on me, softer than I'd ever seen it, and he reached out to brush his hand gently over my cropped blonde hair. "I should never have let you cut this," he said quietly, his tone unreadable. Before I could respond, he leaned closer, cupping my face in his hands. His lips pressed to mine, tender yet insistent. My heart raced as every part of me seemed to melt into him. I couldn't fight it even if I had wanted to. The kiss deepened, unhurried and deliberate, as though he was memorizing the shape of my lips. For a few stolen moments, it was just us. Nothing else existed but the closeness we shared. Then, just as suddenly, he pulled back. My chest heaved, my pulse quickened, but his eyes held a steady resolve. "When you give yourself like this," he whispered, "make sure it's with someone you're certain loves you." I opened my mouth to protest, but he silenced me with another soft kiss, brief, almost aching in its sweetness. Then he pulled the covers up over us both and drew me close, my back pressed to his chest. His warm breath brushed the back of my neck as he murmured a quiet, "Good night." I lay there, wide awake, my mind spinning and my heart caught somewhere between joy and despair. It took a long time before my breathing steadied and exhaustion finally pulled me into sleep. Thanks for listening to today's BL story. If it made your heart skip a beat, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Only here on BL Stories, where love knows no limits.